The gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Hillsboro, New Mexico territory. But Rosalie Harrington didn't flinch. She merely tightened her grip on her carpetbag and kept walking. It was 1882, and she hadn't traveled 1,500 miles from Boston to be deterred by the commonplace sound of frontier violence. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the main street as Rosalie navigated around a water trough and approached what appeared to be the town's only hotel, a weathered two-story building with peeling paint and a crooked sign. Her cream-colored traveling dress, once pristine when she'd boarded the train in Boston, now bore the unmistakable red-brown stains of Western Trail dust. Despite her dishevelment, she carried herself with dignity, her auburn hair pinned neatly beneath a modest hat that had somehow survived the grueling journey. Rosalie pushed through the hotel's doors, the hinges protesting with a screech that caused several heads to turn in her direction. The lobby, such as it was, contained a handful of rough-looking men playing cards and drinking whiskey despite the early hour. Their conversation died as they assessed the newcomer. "I require a room, please," she announced to the balding man behind the counter, who regarded her with undisguised surprise. "Alone, miss?" he asked, his eyes darting to the doorway as if expecting a husband or father to follow. "Yes, alone." Rosalie placed her carpetbag on the floor beside her. "And information about employment opportunities in town, if you would be so kind." The clerk scratched his stubbled chin. $3 a week for the room. As for work—" He paused, looking her over. "Not much call for ladies' work here in Hillsboro, mining town mostly." "I'm willing to consider any respectable position," she replied evenly. "I can cook, clean, sew, and keep accounts." A stocky man with a thick mustache approached from a table in the corner. "Did I hear you say you can cook, miss?" "You did indeed, sir." "I was assistant cook at one of Boston's finest homes before coming west." The man grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Name's Harold Jenkins. Own the Silver Spur Saloon down the street. Lost my cook last week. Fool got himself shot over a card game. Kitchen's been a disaster since. Pays fair and you'd have Sundays off." Before Rosalie could respond, another man rose from his seat by the window. Taller than Jenkins, with a weathered face and sharp eyes, he stepped forward. "Marcus Powell," he introduced himself with a slight bow. "I run the Hillsboro Hotel and Restaurant. My cook's wife is ailing and they're heading back east next week. I'd pay better than Jenkins here, plus room and board included." Jenkins scowled at Powell. "Now see here, gentlemen," Rosalie interrupted. "I appreciate your offers, but I've only just arrived." "Perhaps I could." The door swung open again, and a third man entered, distinguished-looking, with silver at his temples and an expensive suit that marked him as someone of means. His eyes immediately locked on Rosalie. "Edward Blanchard," he announced, removing his hat. "I couldn't help but overhear. I own the largest ranch outside of town, the Double B. My ranch hands have been suffering through my housekeeper's attempts at cooking since my last chef departed. I'd pay handsomely for someone with proper culinary skills, Miss Harrington." Rosalie Harrington. "Miss Harrington, the position includes private quarters in the main house and considerably better company than you'd find in a saloon or hotel." His pointed glance at the other men made his meaning clear. Jenkins stepped closer to Rosalie. "Now don't let Blanchard fool you. His ranch is 15 miles out of town. You'd be stuck out there with 20 cowhands and no decent female companionship." "At least she wouldn't have drunks pawing at her all day," Powell countered. As the three men continued their increasingly heated debate over her future employment, Rosalie felt a headache forming. She'd expected difficulty finding work, but not to be the center of a bidding war within minutes of her arrival. "Gentlemen, please," she attempted, but her voice was drowned out by their arguments. The hotel doors burst open again, and the room fell suddenly silent. Rosalie turned to see a tall man filling the doorframe, backlit by the setting sun. He stepped inside, and she could make out his features ruggedly handsome, with piercing blue eyes that took in the scene before him in an instant. He wore dust-covered riding clothes and a gun belt that had clearly seen use. His dark hair curled slightly beneath a well-worn hat, and a few days' growth of beard shadowed his strong jaw. "What's all this commotion about?" he asked, his voice deep and commanding. Jenkins jerked a thumb toward Rosalie. "New girl in town. Says she can cook." "We're discussing employment opportunities." The newcomer's gaze fell on Rosalie, studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Recognition flashed in his eyes, followed quickly by something else: determination. "She's not available for hire," he stated flatly. "And who are you to say?" Blanchard challenged. The man stepped further into the room, moving with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to danger. "Zachary Winters," he replied, his eyes never leaving Rosalie's face. "And she's not hired. She's my wife." Rosalie's mouth fell open in shock. "I beg your pardon." Zachary Winters crossed the room in 3 long strides and stood beside her. "Play along," he whispered, so softly only she could hear. Then louder, "Sorry I'm late, darling. The cattle drive took longer than expected." Before she could protest, he slipped an arm around her waist and pulled her close to his side. The clean scent of soap beneath trail dust filled her nostrils, and despite her indignation, she felt her heart racing at his proximity. "Your wife," Jenkins spluttered. "You're not married, Winters." "Shows how little you know about my personal affairs," Zachary replied coolly. "We were married back east before I came out here to establish our home. Now that everything's ready, I sent for her to join me." Rosalie found her voice. "Mr. Winters, I don't—" His fingers tightened slightly on her waist in warning, and something in his eyes pleaded with her. "It was a long journey, wasn't it, Rose? You must be exhausted." The 3 would-be employers looked between them suspiciously. Powell narrowed his eyes. "Miss Harrington seemed mighty surprised to see you, Winters." "She wasn't expecting me to meet her here," Zachary replied smoothly. "I was supposed to wait at our homestead, but I couldn't bear to let her make the final leg of the journey alone." Rosalie knew she should expose this outrageous lie, but something held her back. Perhaps it was the desperation she sensed beneath Zachary's confident exterior, or perhaps it was simple curiosity about his motives. Whatever the reason, she found herself nodding. "Yes, it was quite a surprise," she managed, her voice only slightly strained. Blanchard looked unconvinced. "If you're Winter's wife, where's your wedding ring?" Zachary answered before she could. "We had to sell it to finance her journey west. I'll be getting her a new one once the cattle sale goes through next month." Rosalie felt herself blushing at the intimate conversation happening around her. This stranger was creating an entire history for them with such conviction that she almost believed it herself. "Well," Jenkins grumbled, "that's mighty inconvenient. Been without a decent cook for 2 weeks now." "My sympathies," Zachary said, not sounding sympathetic at all. "Now, if you'll excuse us, my wife needs rest." He retrieved Rosalie's carpetbag with his free hand. "We'll be needing that room after all," he told the clerk, who had been watching the exchange with undisguised interest. "Hold on," Rosalie protested, finding her voice at last. "I didn't trust me," Zachary whispered urgently, his breath warm against her ear. "I'll explain everything, but not here. Please." Something in his tone, a genuine note of pleading beneath the commanding exterior, made her hesitate. Every sensible bone in her body told her to expose this charade immediately, but a deeper instinct held her silent. She'd come west seeking a new life and adventure. Perhaps this strange turn of events was the start of both. "Very well," she said finally, allowing him to guide her toward the stairs. "One room or two?" the clerk asked, a knowing smirk on his face. "Two adjoining rooms," Zachary replied firmly, silencing the clerk's insinuation. "My wife's propriety will be respected." As they climbed the stairs, Rosalie's mind raced. Who was this man who had claimed her as his wife? And why? She could feel the three men watching their departure, their disappointed expressions suggesting they believed Zachary's outrageous story. At the top of the stairs, out of sight of those below, Zachary released her waist, but kept his voice low. "I know you must have 1,000 questions." "At least that many," she agreed crisply. "Starting with why I shouldn't call for the sheriff this instant." A shadow crossed his face. "Because I need your help, Miss Harrington, and I think you might need mine too, though you don't know it yet." The clerk appeared at the top of the stairs with 2 keys, preventing further conversation. He led them to 2 rooms at the end of the hallway, opened the doors to reveal sparse but clean accommodations, and left with a knowing wink that made Rosalie flush with indignation. Once they were alone in her room, Rosalie crossed her arms and faced Zachary. "Explain yourself, Mr. Winters, before I scream loud enough to bring the entire town running." Zachary removed his hat, revealing more of his dark hair, and sat heavily on the room's only chair. Up close, she could see the fatigue etched in his face and the tension in his shoulders. "I apologize for the deception, Miss Harrington, truly, but those men downstairs—" He shook his head. "None of them are what they seem. Jenkins' last cook didn't get shot in a card game. He disappeared after asking too many questions about the backroom operations. Powell's cook isn't leaving because his wife is sick. Powell caught him skimming money and threatened to cut off his hands. And Blanchard." His expression darkened. "The last 3 young women who went to work at his ranch came back to town broken in ways that don't show on the skin." Rosalie sank onto the edge of the bed, her legs suddenly unsteady. "How do you know all this?" "Because it's my job to know." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I'm not actually a cattle driver. I work for the Pinkerton Detective Agency. I've been undercover in Hillsboro for 6 months, investigating a counterfeiting operation we believe is centered here." "And that required claiming me as your wife?" she asked skeptically. He had the grace to look embarrassed. "That was improvisation. I couldn't let them hire you. None of those positions would have been safe." He met her eyes directly. "I need someone those men will trust, someone who can go places I can't, hear things I won't. When I saw you walk in and them immediately try to hire you, I recognized an opportunity." "So you want me to spy for you?" Rosalie's voice rose in disbelief. "SHH," he cautioned, glancing at the door. "Not spy exactly, just observe. We'd maintain this pretense of being married, which gives you protection from their advances. You could work at my small ranch, which is real, by the way, and occasionally come into town with me. People talk around women they don't consider a threat." Rosalie stared at him. "This is absurd. I came west to start a new life, not to entangle myself in some dangerous investigation." "What kind of new life did you envision in a mining town like Hillsboro?" he asked gently. The question caught her off guard. What had she expected? The advertisement she'd answered had described opportunity and adventure in the New Mexico territory. The reality, a dusty, rough town with limited options for a single woman, was proving quite different. "I had hoped to find respectable employment and eventually—" She trailed off, unwilling to admit her romanticized notions of Western life. "Eventually find a husband and establish a home," he suggested, no mockery in his tone. "Perhaps," she acknowledged stiffly, "though that's hardly your concern." "It could be mutually beneficial," Zachary said. "You'd have safe employment. protection from men like those downstairs, and once my investigation is complete, I'd ensure you're established with a genuine position or help you move on to someplace more suitable." Rosalie twisted her hands in her lap. "And if I refuse? If I walk downstairs right now and expose your lie?" His expression grew serious. "Then I won't stop you. But I'd strongly advise against taking any position with Jenkins, Powell, or Blanchard. There are other towns nearby where you might find safer prospects." She studied him, trying to determine if he was being truthful. His eyes held steady on hers, allowing her scrutiny without flinching. "Why should I believe you're any different from them?" she finally asked. Zachary reached inside his vest and withdrew a small leather case, which he opened to reveal a Pinkerton Detective Agency badge. "Because unlike them, I'm showing you who I really am and giving you a choice." The badge looked authentic, though Rosalie had never seen one before. Still, there was something in his direct gaze that inspired more trust than the leering looks of the men downstairs. How long would this arrangement last? 2 months at most. I'm close to breaking this case. "And you truly have a ranch where I would stay," he nodded. "Small but comfortable. 5 miles outside town. I have a housekeeper there already, Mrs. Abernathy, a respectable widow in her 60s. You wouldn't be alone with me." That eased one of her primary concerns. "And my duties would be cooking for me and my 2 ranch hands. Accompanying me to town occasionally, listening but never putting yourself at risk." He leaned forward. "Miss Harrington, I'm not asking you to do anything dangerous, just to be present and observant." Rosalie rose and walked to the window, looking out at the dusty street below. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows and painting the mountains in the distance with gold and crimson. She'd come west seeking a new beginning, and while this wasn't what she'd imagined, it offered protection in a place that suddenly seemed more perilous than she'd anticipated. 2 months, she said finally, turning back to face him. "And I want your word as a gentleman that you'll respect my privacy and propriety throughout." Relief washed over his features. "You have it. We'll maintain separate quarters and our marriage will be in name only. And you'll pay me a fair wage for my cooking services." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Of course. Are you actually a good cook?" For the first time since entering Hillsboro, Rosalie felt herself smiling too. "The best you'll find this side of the Mississippi, Mr. Winters." "Zachary," he corrected. "Or Zach. If we're to convince anyone we're married, you should use my given name." "Zachary," she repeated, testing the sound. "And I suppose you'll call me Rosalie." "Rose," he said. "I already started that downstairs. It seems more intimate." A flush crept up her neck at his words, though his tone remained professional. "Very well. When do we leave for this ranch of yours?" "First light tomorrow. It's too dangerous to travel after dark." He stood, retrieving his hat. "I'll take the adjoining room. There's a connecting door, but I'll ensure it remains locked from your side." Rosalie nodded, suddenly uncertain now that she'd agreed to his outlandish plan. Zachary paused at the door to the hallway. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I know this isn't what you planned when you came west, but I believe you may have just saved lives by agreeing to help." After he left, Rosalie sat on the bed for a long while, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake or embarked on the adventure she'd secretly craved. Either way, she was now, at least in the eyes of Hillsboro, Mrs. Zachary Winters, a role she had never anticipated playing. Morning came with the crowing of roosters and the distant sound of a mining whistle. Rosalie had slept fitfully, her dreams filled with images of the 3 men from the lobby and Zachary's warnings about them. By the time a soft knock came at her door, she was already dressed in her simplest day dress, a practical blue cotton with minimal bustle that would serve for ranch life. "Are you ready?" Zachary asked when she opened the door. In the clear morning light, she could better appreciate his appearance. Clean-shaven now and dressed in fresh clothes, he looked every inch the respectable rancher. "As ready as one can be when embarking on a fraudulent marriage," she replied, though without real rancor. His mouth quirked upward. "I've arranged for breakfast downstairs, and then we'll head out. I've also taken the liberty of purchasing a few supplies you might need, Mrs. Abernathy provided a list. The thoughtfulness of this gesture surprised her. "Thank you." Breakfast was a tense affair, with Jenkins and Powell both present in the hotel's small dining room, watching them with suspicious eyes. Zachary maintained their charade flawlessly, his hand occasionally covering hers on the table, his conversation referring to our future and our home with such naturalness that Rosalie almost believed it herself. "Your husband's got a nice spread," Jenkins commented as they were finishing their meal. "Not as grand as Blanchard's, of course, but respectable. Surprised he never mentioned a wife back east." "Zachary is a private man," Rosalie replied, finding it easier than expected to fall into her role. "And our separation has been difficult. We preferred not to discuss it." Zachary's fingers squeezed hers gratefully. "The important thing is that we're together now." Jenkins snorted. "Well, if you get tired of ranch life, my offer still stands. Could use someone with your cooking skills." "She won't be needing alternative employment," Zachary said, an edge creeping into his voice. "We'll see about that," Jenkins muttered, just loud enough to be heard. Outside, Zachary helped Rosalie into a modest wagon loaded with supplies. Her carpet bag and a trunk he'd purchased for the additional clothing necessities were secured in the back. "Jenkins doesn't seem convinced by our story," she observed as they pulled away from the hotel. "He's one of my primary suspects," Zachary replied, keeping his voice low despite the privacy of the wagon. "He has connections throughout the territory and access to materials needed for counterfeiting. The Silver Spur's back room has irregular visitors at odd hours." As they left the town behind, the landscape opened up before them, vast and beautiful in the morning light. Rolling hills covered in scrub brush gave way to more dramatic terrain, with mountains rising in the distance. The spring air was crisp and clean, unlike anything Rosalie had known in Boston. "It's beautiful," she admitted, drinking in the wild landscape. "Different than I imagined, but beautiful nonetheless." Zachary glanced at her, something softening in his expression. "The territory gets under your skin." "I came out here for this assignment expecting to be counting the days until I could return east. Now," he gestured to the expansive vista, "I'm not so sure I want to leave." "The ranch is really yours?" she asked. "It is now. I purchased it as part of my cover, but I've grown attached to it. Might keep it when this is all over." He clicked to the horses, urging them up a slight incline. "What brought you all the way from Boston, if you don't mind my asking?" Rosalie was silent for a moment, considering how much to share. "My parents died in a fire 3 years ago. I've been working as assistant cook for the Blackwell family since then, but it wasn't the life you wanted," he finished when she trailed off. "No. After the fire, I inherited enough money to be independent at least for a while. When I saw an advertisement seeking women of good character to come west, where opportunities were plentiful." She shrugged. "It seemed like a chance to start fresh. Those advertisements rarely tell the whole truth about frontier life," Zachary said gently. "I'm beginning to realize that." She straightened her shoulders. "Nevertheless, I'm here now, and I intend to make the best of it." He smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his face. "I believe you will, Rose." The way he said her shortened name sent an unexpected warmth through her, which she quickly attributed to the strengthening morning sun. The journey to the ranch took just over 2 hours. As they crested a final hill, Zachary pointed to a cluster of buildings nestled in a small valley below. There it is. Not much compared to Eastern standards, but it's sound and secure. Rosalie took in the modest homestead, a main house built of sturdy logs, a barn, what appeared to be bunkhouse, and various smaller outbuildings, all surrounded by fenced pastureland where cattle grazed. A stream ran along one edge of the property, its banks lined with cottonwood trees that provided welcome shade. "It's lovely," she said, and meant it. The setting was peaceful, the structures well maintained if simple. As they approached, a stout older woman emerged from the main house, shading her eyes against the sun. Behind her, two men appeared from the direction of the barn, one tall and lanky, the other shorter but powerfully built. "Mrs. Abernathy," Zachary called as they pulled up to the house. "I've returned with my wife, as promised." Rosalie tensed, wondering if the housekeeper was aware of their deception, but the older woman merely smiled and approached the wagon. "Welcome, Mrs. Winters," she said warmly. "We've been eager to meet you." Zachary helped Rosalie down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady at her waist. The brief contact sent another of those unexpected tremors through her body. "Mrs. Abernathy has been keeping house here since I purchased the property," Zachary explained. "And these are Pete and Daniel, my ranch hands." The men touched their hats respectfully, though curiosity was evident in their expressions. "Boss never said he had a wife until yesterday," Pete, the taller one, remarked with a grin. "Quite the surprise." "A pleasant one," Daniel added. "His cooking's been killing us slowly." "Go unload the supplies," Zachary ordered, though without real sternness. "My wife needs to settle in." As the men moved to obey, Mrs. Abernathy led Rosalie toward the house. "I've prepared the main bedroom for you both. It's not fancy, but it's comfortable." Rosalie shot a panicked glance at Zachary, who stepped in smoothly. "Actually, Mrs. Abernathy, after so long apart, Rose and I have grown accustomed to our own space. Could you prepare the small bedroom for her as well, just until we reacquaint ourselves?" The housekeeper's eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded. "Of course. Whatever makes you comfortable, dear," she said to Rosalie. The main house was simple but well appointed, with a large kitchen and dining area, a comfortable sitting room, and 3 bedrooms. Everything was scrupulously clean, if somewhat sparse in decoration. Rosalie was shown to a small bedroom that obviously served as Zachary's office, with a desk and bookshelf along one wall. "I'll move these things," Zachary said, indicating the desk. "You should have proper space." "No need," Rosalie replied. "It's only temporary after all." Something flickered in his eyes at her words, disappointment perhaps, but he merely nodded. "I'll have your trunk brought in. Mrs. Abernathy can help you unpack while I see to the horses." Once they were alone, the housekeeper closed the door and turned to Rosalie with an unexpectedly shrewd expression. "So, you're not really married to him, are you?" Rosalie froze, her carefully constructed composure cracking. What makes you say that?" Mrs. Abernathy chuckled. "Dear girl, I've been married 42 years before my Harold passed. I know what a real marriage looks like, and whatever's between you and Mr. Winters, it ain't that. Yet." "Yet," Rosalie repeated, flustered. "He told me about his real work when he hired me," the older woman continued, ignoring Rosalie's discomfort. "Needed someone he could trust completely. I'm guessing this marriage of yours is part of his investigation somehow." Relief flooded through Rosalie. "Yes, it was. Unexpected. I arrived in town yesterday, and suddenly I was being claimed as his wife. Well, there are worse fates than pretending to be married to a man like Zachary Winters." Mrs. Abernathy began helping her unpack the trunk. "He's a good man, honorable, and not hard on the eyes, if you don't mind my saying." Rosalie felt her cheeks warm. "Our arrangement is strictly professional, if you say so, dear." The housekeeper's knowing smile suggested she wasn't convinced. "Now, he tells me you're a skilled cook, which is a blessing. These men have been surviving on my basic fare, and Mr. Winters' occasional attempts, which are best not discussed in polite company." Grateful for the change of subject, Rosalie outlined her culinary experience and discussed meal planning for the ranch. By the time Zachary returned from the barn, they had established a comfortable rapport and were discussing the garden Mrs. Abernathy maintained behind the house. "Everything to your satisfaction?" he asked, his gaze moving between them. "Mrs. Abernathy has been most welcoming," Rosalie replied carefully. "Good. I've told the men you'll start cooking duties tomorrow to give you time to settle in today." He hesitated. "I thought perhaps I could show you around the property this afternoon, if you're not too tired from the journey." "I'd like that," Rosalie said, surprising herself with her sincerity. After a simple lunch, Zachary led her on a tour of the ranch. The property was larger than it had appeared from the road, encompassing not just the buildings and pastures she'd seen, but also wooded areas and a picturesque bend in the stream that formed a natural swimming hole. "It's beautiful here," she commented as they stood by the water. "Peaceful." "It is," he agreed, "though I should warn you will need to make regular appearances in town to maintain our cover. People would find it suspicious if I suddenly stopped coming in now that my wife has arrived." "I understand." Rosalie watched the water rippling over stones. "Will it be dangerous?" He considered this. "Not if we're careful. You'll be with me at all times in town. The men we're investigating are cautious they won't risk exposing themselves with any obvious threats." "When will we need to go?" "Saturday," he replied. "There's a small social at the church. It would be the natural place to introduce my new wife to the community." Rosalie nodded, mentally calculating what she might wear for such an occasion. "And what exactly should I be listening for when we're in town?" Zachary picked up a flat stone and skipped it across the water. "Any mention of paper goods or special orders from Santa Fe or El Paso. References to the midnight stage that don't match the actual stage schedule. Names like Cortez or Bishop. That doesn't seem so difficult." "It's not, in theory, but these men are careful. They don't discuss business openly." He turned to face her fully. "The most important thing is your safety. If at any point you feel uncomfortable or threatened, you tell me immediately. This charade isn't worth putting you in genuine danger." His concern seemed sincere, and Rosalie felt a strange flutter in her chest. "I'll be careful," she promised. They continued their walk, Zachary pointing out the boundaries of his property and explaining the operation of the small cattle ranch. By the time they returned to the house, Rosalie had a much clearer understanding of her temporary home and her role in it. That evening, dinner was a slightly awkward affair. Pete and Daniel clearly had questions about their boss's sudden marriage but were too respectful to ask directly. Instead, they made polite conversation, asking Rosalie about her journey west and her impressions of the territory. "Not quite what you expected, I'd wager," Pete said with a grin. "Most Easterners come thinking we all live like wild Indians or gunfight in the streets every day." "It is different," Rosalie acknowledged, "but not unpleasantly so." "Wait till you've been through a summer dust storm or winter blizzard," Daniel chuckled. "Then see if you still feel that way." "My wife is more resilient than she appears," Zachary interjected, his hand covering hers on the table in what was becoming a familiar gesture. Each time he touched her, even in these innocent ways, Rosalie felt that same inexplicable warmth spread through her body. After dinner, the ranch hands retired to the bunkhouse, and Mrs. Abernathy to her small room off the kitchen, leaving Rosalie and Zachary alone in the sitting room. "You're handling this situation remarkably well," he commented, pouring her a small glass of sherry. "I'm not sure I have much choice," she replied, accepting the drink, "but it hasn't been as difficult as I feared. Your people are kind. They're good workers, loyal." He settled into a chair across from her. "I should warn you, Mrs. Abernathy knows the truth about our arrangement. I needed someone here I could trust completely, so she's aware of my real work." "She mentioned that," Rosalie said with a small smile, "though she seemed to think our pretend marriage might not remain pretend indefinitely." To her surprise, Zachary looked away, a flush creeping up his neck. "Mrs. Abernathy has romantic notions. Please don't let it make you uncomfortable." "It doesn't," she assured him, though the housekeeper's insinuation had been on her mind throughout the afternoon. There was no denying Zachary Winters was an attractive man, and his consideration for her comfort and safety was appealing. They talked for another hour, Zachary filling her in on more details of his investigation and the key figures in town she should recognize. By the time they retired to their separate bedrooms, Rosalie felt more prepared for her role as his wife, and more confused by her growing attraction to a man she barely knew. The next few days established a routine that felt surprisingly comfortable. Rosalie took over cooking duties, delighting the men with her culinary skills. She helped Mrs. Abernathy with the garden, learned about the operation of the ranch, and spent evenings in the sitting room with Zachary, discussing his case or simply talking about their lives before meeting. She learned he'd grown up in Chicago, the son of a police officer who'd been killed in the line of duty. He joined the Pinkertons at 22 and spent the last 8 years working increasingly complex cases throughout the country. "This counterfeiting ring is the biggest operation I've tackled," he admitted one evening. "They're moving thousands of dollars in false currency through the territory, undermining the economy and funding other criminal enterprises." "And you're certain it's centered in Hillsboro?" Rosalie asked. "The distribution is, yes. The actual printing likely happens elsewhere, probably in one of the larger towns, but Hillsboro is the hub." His expression grew serious. "These aren't small-time criminals, Rose. They're dangerous men who wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatens their operation." The gravity of his work and the risk he took daily struck her anew. "How do you live with such danger?" He considered this. "You get accustomed to it, and the work matters. It protects innocent people." "Like me," she said softly. "If you hadn't intervened, I might have unknowingly walked into a dangerous situation with one of those men." Zachary's eyes met hers. "That's part of why I acted so impulsively when I saw those 3 circling you like wolves." He shook his head. "I couldn't let that happen." Something in his gaze made her heart beat faster. She looked away first, suddenly conscious of how alone they were in the quiet house. "It's getting late," she said, rising from her chair, "and tomorrow is our appearance in town." "Yes," he agreed, standing as well. "You should rest. Town days can be taxing." At her bedroom door he paused. "Thank you, Rose, not just for helping with my investigation, but for bringing some life back to this place. It's been a long time since I've enjoyed evenings like these." Before she could respond, he leaned down and brushed his lips against her cheek, a gesture that could have been interpreted as merely maintaining their cover, had anyone been watching. But they were alone, and the tender touch felt like something more. "Good night," he murmured, and disappeared into his own room, leaving Rosalie standing in her doorway, her fingertips touching the spot where his lips had been. Saturday morning dawned clear and mild. Rosalie dressed carefully in her best remaining dress, a lavender creation with modest bustle and lace trim at the collar and cuffs. Mrs. Abernathy helped her arrange her hair in a fashionable but not overly elaborate style, secured with tortoiseshell combs that had belonged to her mother. When she emerged from her room, Zachary was waiting in the sitting area, dressed in what was clearly his Sunday best, a dark suit, crisp white shirt, and string tie. He stared at her for a long moment before finding his voice. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you." She smoothed her skirts nervously. "Will I pass inspection as a rancher's wife?" His smile was warm. "You'll be the most elegant woman in Hillsboro, I guarantee it." The wagon ride to town gave Rosalie time to review what they'd discussed, the details of their supposed courtship and marriage, the names of key figures in town, and what to listen for regarding the counterfeiting operation. "Remember, you're my wife," Zachary said as they approached the outskirts of Hillsboro. "That means you can be affectionate without raising eyebrows." "Affectionate," she repeated, a flutter of anticipation in her stomach. "Nothing improper," he assured her quickly. "But holding hands, standing close, the things married couples do naturally." Rosalie nodded, trying to ignore the way her pulse quickened at the thought. The church social was held in the modest building that served as Hillsboro's place of worship. Trestle tables laden with food lined one wall, while clusters of chairs and small tables provided seating for the attendees. Despite the early hour, it was not yet 11. Most of the town appeared to be present. Conversation faltered as they entered, all eyes turning to assess the newcomers. Zachary placed a protective hand at the small of Rosalie's back, guiding her forward with confidence. "Good morning," he greeted those nearest the door. "I'd like to introduce my wife, Rosalie. She arrived from Boston last week." What followed was a whirlwind of introductions. Rosalie met the pastor and his wife, the town doctor, the proprietor of the general store, and countless other residents whose names blurred together. Most seemed genuinely welcoming, though she detected curiosity and speculation in many gazes. Jenkins and Powell were both present, eyeing them with barely concealed suspicion. Blanchard arrived later, moving through the crowd with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to deference. "Winters," he acknowledged coolly when they eventually crossed paths. "And Mrs. Winters, how convenient that you arrived just when I was seeking a cook." "Fortunate timing," Zachary replied, his arm sliding around Rosalie's waist possessively. "Indeed." Blanchard's eyes lingered on Rosalie. "Should your domestic situation change, my offer remains open." "It won't," Zachary stated firmly. As Blanchard moved away, Rosalie released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "He's unpleasant and dangerous," Zachary murmured. "Stay clear of him even when I'm present." Throughout the morning, Rosalie maintained her role as the devoted new wife, standing close to Zachary, laughing at his remarks, and occasionally touching his arm or hand in seemingly unconscious gestures of affection. What surprised her was how natural these actions felt, and how frequently Zachary reciprocated with small touches of his own. During a lull in the socializing, Zachary guided her to a quiet corner. "You're doing wonderfully," he said, his voice low. "Everyone believes we're besotted newlyweds." "Is that what we're supposed to be?" she asked, aware of his proximity in the small space. His eyes darkened slightly. "It's the most believable explanation for why I never mentioned a wife until you arrived." Before she could respond, Jenkins approached, interrupting their private moment. "Mrs. Winters," he said, his gaze roving over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "You're settling into ranch life, I hope." "Very well, thank you," she replied coolly. "Shame to waste your talents out there with just 3 men to cook for." He glanced at Zachary. "My offer still stands if you change your mind. Always room for a pretty face at the Silver Spur." "My wife isn't interested," Zachary said, an edge to his voice. Jenkins smirked. "Let the lady speak for herself." I'm quite content with my current situation, Rosalie stated firmly. For now, perhaps. Jenkins leaned closer, dropping his voice. But ranch life gets mighty lonely in the winter months. Might be you'll want more stimulating company by then. Zachary stiffened beside her, but before he could respond, the pastor called for everyone's attention to say a blessing over the meal. Jenkins moved away with a final knowing look that left Rosalie feeling vaguely unclean. "I'm sorry," Zachary murmured as they joined the others. "I didn't anticipate he'd be so bold." "It's not your fault," she assured him, "and I'm perfectly capable of handling unwanted attention." His expression softened. "I don't doubt it. Still, I don't like the way he looks at you." The possessive note in his voice sent a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the crowded room. After the blessing, they filled plates with the potluck offerings and found seats at a table with the doctor and his wife. The conversation was pleasant, focusing on innocuous topics like the weather, the upcoming county fair, and Rosalie's impressions of the territory. As the afternoon progressed, Rosalie began to relax into her role. She circulated through the social, always within sight of Zachary, but occasionally engaging in separate conversations with the women of the town. She listened carefully for any mention of the names or phrases Zachary had warned her about, but heard nothing suspicious. The sun was beginning to lower in the sky when she overheard a conversation that caught her attention. Standing near the refreshment table, ostensibly selecting a cookie, she listened as Powell spoke quietly with a man she hadn't been introduced to. "Midnight delivery still on for Tuesday?" the stranger asked. Powell nodded slightly. "Usual place. Bishop's sending his best stock this time. Quality better be better than last month's. Customers complained." "It will be. New paper," he says, "smoother finish." The men moved away before Rosalie could hear more, but her heart raced with excitement. This was exactly the kind of conversation Zachary had told her to listen for. She made her way casually back to his side, where he was discussing cattle prices with two local ranchers. When there was a break in the conversation, she leaned close, as a wife might to whisper something affectionate. "Powell," she murmured against his ear. "Midnight delivery Tuesday. Something about Bishop and new paper with a smoother finish." Zachary's arm tightened around her waist, his only visible reaction to her news. To anyone watching, they would have appeared to be sharing a private moment between husband and wife. "Well, gentlemen," he said to the ranchers, "my wife is giving me that look that means it's time to head home. You know how it is with newlyweds." The men chuckled knowingly, and Rosalie felt her face flush at the implication. Zachary guided her toward the door, stopping to make their farewells to the pastor and several others. Once they were in the wagon and headed out of town, he turned to her eagerly. "Tell me exactly what you heard." Rosalie repeated the conversation verbatim, including the men's tone and demeanor. "That's it," Zachary said, excitement evident in his voice. "Tuesday at midnight. That gives us 3 days to prepare." "Prepare for what?" she asked, suddenly apprehensive. "I need to send a telegram to my supervisor. If we can catch them in the act of delivery, we'll have enough evidence to arrest the entire ring." He reached over and squeezed her hand. "You've done brilliantly, Rose." His praise warmed her, but a sense of unease lingered. "What happens after the arrests? To our arrangement?" Zachary's expression grew more serious. "My assignment would be complete. I'd be recalled to Chicago, most likely. And the ranch, I'd probably sell it. Unless—" He hesitated, then seemed to think better of whatever he'd been about to say. "We can discuss all that after Tuesday. For now, let's focus on completing this case successfully." The remainder of the ride passed in relative silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Rosalie couldn't help wondering what would happen when their pretend marriage inevitably ended. In just a week, she'd grown accustomed to life at the ranch, to Mrs. Abernathy's motherly presence, to the good-natured banter of Pete and Daniel, and most of all, to Zachary's company in the quiet evenings. The thought of losing it all left an unexpected ache in her chest. Sunday passed quietly at the ranch. Zachary rode into town alone to send his telegram, leaving Rosalie to ponder their situation. By the time he returned, she'd reached a decision she would enjoy these final days of their arrangement without worrying about what came after. The future would sort itself out when the time came. Monday brought an unexpected complication. Rosalie was in the kitchen preparing lunch when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Looking out the window, she was alarmed to see Jenkins Powell and two men she didn't recognize riding toward the house. "Zachary," she called urgently. He appeared from his bedroom where he'd been writing reports, instantly alert at her tone. "What is it?" "Jenkins and Powell are here, with two others." His expression hardened. "Stay inside. If anything happens, take Mrs. Abernathy and go out the back, through the cottonwoods to the Johnson place 2 miles east." Before she could protest, he strapped on his gun belt and went outside to meet the visitors. Rosalie moved to the window, her heart pounding as she watched Zachary stand on the porch, one hand resting casually near his holstered weapon. "Winters," Jenkins called as they reined in. "Hope we're not interrupting anything domestic. What brings you out here, Jenkins?" Zachary's voice was calm but wary. "Neighborly visit," Powell answered with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Wanted to check how the new missus is settling in." "She's fine. I'll tell her you asked after her." Jenkins dismounted, the others following suit. "Actually, we were hoping to speak with her ourselves. Woman in town said she was asking mighty specific questions at the social yesterday, about business matters that don't concern her." Rosalie's blood ran cold. Someone had noticed her eavesdropping. "My wife is inside resting," Zachary replied. Whatever questions she asked were innocent curiosity, nothing more. "Why don't we let her tell us that?" One of the unknown men stepped forward, his hand moving toward the gun at his hip. Zachary's posture shifted subtly, and Rosalie recognized he was preparing for violence. "I think you boys should leave," he said, his voice dangerously soft. Now, the tension in the yard was palpable. Rosalie glanced around desperately, looking for anything she could use to help if the situation deteriorated. The standoff was broken by the sound of approaching riders from the opposite direction. Pete and Daniel appeared, returning from checking the north pasture. They took in the scene instantly and rode to flank Zachary on the porch, their hands hovering near their weapons. Jenkins assessed the changed odds and forced a laugh. "No need for all this tension, Winters. Just being friendly." He remounted his horse. "Tell your wife we're looking forward to seeing her in town again soon." The implied threat was unmistakable. The 4 men turned their horses and rode away, but not before Powell called back over his shoulder, "Give our best to Mrs. Winters. Such a pretty little thing." Once they were out of sight, Zachary hurried inside, his face grim. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Rosalie assured him, though her hands were shaking. "What did they want?" "They suspect something." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Someone must have seen you listening to Powell yesterday." "I'm sorry," she began, but he cut her off. "No, this isn't your fault. I put you in this position." He paced the kitchen. "This changes things. The delivery is still happening tomorrow night, but they'll be on high alert now." "What do we do?" Zachary's expression was grave. "I'm taking you to town to the sheriff's office. You'll be safer there while I handle this." "No." The firmness in her own voice surprised her. "I won't hide while you put yourself in danger, not when I'm the reason they're suspicious." Rose, these men are killers. If they discover I'm a Pinkerton agent, all the more reason you shouldn't face them alone." She straightened her shoulders. "I agreed to help with your investigation, and that's what I intend to do." Zachary stared at her, conflict evident in his eyes. "It's too dangerous." "Life is dangerous, Zachary, especially out here." She moved closer to him. "I've spent 3 years playing it safe after my parents died. I came west because I wanted something more than safety." The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. For a moment, she thought he might pull her into his arms. Instead, he exhaled slowly. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met," he said, but there was admiration in his tone. "So I've been told," she replied with a small smile. That evening, they gathered in the sitting room to discuss the plan for the following night. Zachary had revealed his true identity to Pete and Daniel, who had proven their loyalty during the confrontation and would provide backup. "The delivery will take place at the abandoned silver mine just outside town," Zachary explained, pointing to a spot on a rough map. "Powell will be there, almost certainly Jenkins too. Possibly Blanchard, though he usually keeps his distance from the actual transactions." "And our positions?" Daniel asked. "Pete, you'll watch the road from town. Daniel, you'll cover the back trail that leads toward the mountains." "I'll approach from the east where I can observe the exchange directly." "What about me?" Rosalie asked. Zachary hesitated. "You'll remain here with Mrs. Abernathy." "That wasn't our agreement," she protested. "I can help." "It's too dangerous, Rose. These men have already threatened you specifically." She crossed her arms. "I could be your lookout. I could stay with the horses, well away from the actual confrontation." Pete and Daniel exchanged amused glances at their boss being challenged so directly, but wisely remained silent. Zachary studied her determined expression and finally sighed. "You can accompany me to the ridge overlooking the mine, but you'll stay there out of sight while I move in closer. If anything goes wrong, you ride straight back here. No heroics. Agreed?" "Agreed," she said, relieved to be included at all. The four of them spent another hour refining the details of the plan. When they finally retired for the night, Rosalie found herself too keyed up to sleep. She paced her small bedroom, alternating between excitement and fear about what the next night would bring. A soft knock at her door startled her. She opened it to find Zachary standing there, looking as restless as she felt. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted. "May I come in?" She hesitated only briefly before stepping aside. Propriety seemed less important now, with potential danger looming. Zachary entered but remained standing near the door. "I want to apologize," he said. "For what?" "For involving you in all this. It wasn't fair of me to claim you as my wife that day, to pull you into a dangerous investigation without giving you a real choice." "You did give me a choice," she reminded him. "I could have exposed your lie at any time. Why didn't you?" His question was soft but intense. Rosalie looked away. "At first, it was practical. You offered protection from men who, as you've proven, aren't to be trusted. And then—" She trailed off, uncertain how to express the complicated feelings that had developed. "And then," he prompted, moving closer. She met his gaze. "And then I began to enjoy being Mrs. Winters, even if it was just pretend." Something flared in his eyes, hope perhaps, or desire. "Rose," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "You should go," she whispered, though everything in her wanted him to stay. "Tomorrow is important. We both need rest." He nodded slowly. "You're right." At the door, he paused. "When this is over, when the case is closed, we should talk about the future." "Yes," she agreed softly. "We should." After he left, Rosalie lay awake for a long time, her thoughts in turmoil. Was it possible that Zachary shared her growing feelings? And if he did, what would that mean for both of them once his assignment ended? Tuesday passed with tense anticipation. Rosalie went through her normal routine cooking meals, helping Mrs. Abernathy with household tasks, but her mind was fixed on the coming night. Zachary spent most of the day checking and cleaning his weapons and reviewing plans with Pete and Daniel. As dusk fell, a nervous energy pervaded the house. Rosalie changed into her simplest dress and sturdy boots, pinning her hair securely beneath a dark hat that wouldn't reflect moonlight. When she emerged from her room, Zachary was waiting, similarly dressed for stealth in dark clothing. "Last chance to change your mind," he said quietly. "Not likely," she replied with more confidence than she felt. They set out an hour before midnight, riding at a careful pace through the darkened landscape. The moon was only a quarter full, providing just enough light to navigate while still allowing them to remain relatively hidden. Pete and Daniel had left earlier to take up their positions. The abandoned silver mine was located in a rocky area 3 miles outside town. As they approached, Zachary led them on a circuitous route to avoid being seen or heard by anyone who might already be in position. "We'll leave the horses here," he whispered when they reached a sheltered area behind a rocky outcropping. "The ridge is just ahead. You'll have a clear view of the mine entrance while staying hidden." Rosalie dismounted, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. This was nothing like the safe, predictable life she'd led in Boston, yet she felt more alive than she had in years. Zachary secured the horses, then led her carefully along the ridge. They crouched behind a large boulder, and he pointed to the clearing below where the mine entrance was clearly visible in the dim moonlight. "2 men already in position," he murmured, indicating subtle movements near the mine shaft. "Probably guards. The main group hasn't arrived yet." "What exactly will happen?" Rosalie whispered. "A wagon will come, carrying the counterfeit bills. They'll exchange them for payment, then distribute the fake currency to various operatives who spread it throughout the territory." He checked his pocket watch. 20 minutes until midnight. They settled into watchful silence. Zachary removed his revolver from its holster and checked it once more. "Stay here," he instructed. "No matter what happens down there, don't leave this position unless I signal you or you're in immediate danger. If you hear gunfire and I don't return within 30 minutes, ride back to the ranch and tell Mrs. Abernathy to take you to Sheriff Collins. He's not involved in the counterfeiting." Rosalie nodded, her mouth suddenly dry. The reality of the danger was setting in. "Zachary," she said softly, "be careful." He turned to her, his expression intense in the moonlight. Without warning, he leaned forward and kissed her, not the chaste peck on the cheek he'd given her before, but a real kiss, firm and passionate. When he pulled away, they were both breathless. "For luck," he murmured. Before she could respond, he slipped away into the darkness, moving silently down the ridge toward the mine. Rosalie touched her fingers to her lips, still feeling the warmth of his kiss. Her heart raced, and not just from the danger of their situation. That kiss had felt real as any of the growing feelings she'd been trying to ignore. The sound of approaching horses pulled her attention back to the clearing below. A wagon appeared, flanked by riders. In the dim light, she could make out Jenkins driving the wagon, with Powell and Blanchard among the mounted men. They were joined by the 2 guards who'd been waiting, forming a group of 7 or 8 men total. More horses approached from the opposite direction, 3 riders leading pack animals. Even from a distance, Rosalie could tell these were not local men. They dressed differently, with wide-brimmed hats and serapes wrapped around their shoulders against the night chill. The 2 groups met at the mine entrance. Words were exchanged, though Rosalie couldn't hear what was said. Jenkins climbed down from the wagon and opened a large trunk in the back. One of the newcomers dismounted and inspected the contents. Movement caught her eye, a shadow detaching itself from the darkness near the mine entrance. Zachary. He was moving closer to the gathering, using the uneven terrain for cover. Rosalie held her breath, afraid even the smallest sound might give him away. The exchange seemed to be proceeding smoothly. Money changed hands, and the newcomers began loading packages from the wagon onto their pack animals. Rosalie strained to see where Zachary had gone, finally spotting him crouched behind a pile of tailings from the mine, close enough to witness the transaction clearly. Everything happened at once. One of the pack animals spooked, rearing suddenly. In the confusion, someone shouted and a lantern was raised higher, casting its light directly on Zachary's position. His cover blown, he stood, badge in one hand, gun in the other. "Pinkerton Detective Agency," his voice rang out. "You're all under arrest for counterfeiting and distribution of illegal currency." For a heartbeat, everyone froze. Then chaos erupted. Guns were drawn, shots fired. The newcomers scattered, trying to escape with their pack animals. Jenkins, Powell, and their men took cover, returning fire. Zachary ducked behind the tailings pile as bullets struck around him. From her vantage point, Rosalie could see what he couldn't. Blanchard circling wide, moving to flank him. Without thinking, she stood up on the ridge. "Zachary, behind you," her warning saved his life. He spun just as Blanchard raised his gun, getting off a shot that sent the rancher diving for cover. But her action had consequences. Several of the men below spotted her on the ridge. "There's another one up there," Jenkins shouted. "Get her." Two men broke away from the main group and started up the path toward her position. Rosalie ducked down, heart hammering. She needed to move to find better cover, but the ridge offered limited options. Gunfire continued to echo through the clearing below. She heard Zachary shout something, followed by answering calls from Pete and Daniel, who had apparently moved in from their positions to support him. The men ascending the ridge were getting closer. Rosalie crawled backward, trying to reach the spot where they'd left the horses. If she could mount, she might outrun her pursuers. A bullet struck rock inches from her head, sending chips of stone flying. She gasped and pressed herself flat against the ground. Another shot, closer this time. They'd spotted her movement. "I see her," one of the men called. "Up ahead." Rosalie abandoned stealth for speed, scrambling to her feet and running in a crouch toward the horses. She could hear heavy footsteps behind her, gaining ground. She reached the horses and frantically untied the reins of her mount. As she prepared to swing into the saddle, rough hands grabbed her from behind. "Got her!" A voice growled triumphantly. Rosalie fought like a wildcat, kicking and clawing at her captor. She managed to twist in his grip and raked her nails down his face, drawing blood. "You little hellcat!" He snarled, slapping her hard enough to make her ears ring. The second man arrived, breathing heavily from the climb. "Bring her down. Jenkins wants her alive." "She'll be alive," her captor muttered, binding her wrists with a leather cord. "Might not be happy about it, though." They dragged her back toward the path. Below, the gunfight had reached a lull. Several forms lay motionless on the ground, though in the poor light, Rosalie couldn't tell who they were. Her heart seized with fear for Zachary. As they descended into the clearing, she saw Jenkins standing near the wagon, a bleeding wound on his arm. Powell was nowhere in sight. Of the newcomers, only one remained, sitting on the ground with his hands tied behind him. "Look what we found," her captor announced, shoving Rosalie forward. Jenkins examined her with cold eyes. "Mrs. Winters, or should I say whoever you really are, no real wife would be out here in the middle of the night watching a business transaction." "Go to hell," Rosalie spat, tasting blood from her split lip. He chuckled. "Spirited, I like that." His expression hardened. "Where's Winters?" Still alive, or did my men get him? As if in answer, a shot rang out from the darkness beyond the mine entrance. One of Jenkins' remaining men cried out and fell. "Surrender, Jenkins," Zachary's voice called. "We've got the place surrounded." "Powell and Blanchard are already in custody," Jenkins cursed viciously. "You're bluffing, Winters." He grabbed Rosalie and pressed a gun to her temple. "Come out now, or your woman dies." Silence fell over the clearing. Rosalie stood perfectly still, feeling the cold metal against her skin. Despite her fear, she felt oddly calm, a strange clarity descending over her. "Last chance, Winters," Jenkins shouted. "Show yourself." "Let her go, Jenkins." Zachary emerged from the shadows, his gun lowered. "This is between you and me. Drop the weapon, kick it away." Zachary complied, his eyes locked on Rosalie's. "Are you hurt?" he asked her. "Not seriously," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Jenkins laughed. "Touching. Now, here's what's going to happen. My men and I are leaving with the lady. Once we're safely away, we'll release her. Try to follow, and she dies." "You know I can't let you leave," Zachary said evenly. "You don't have a choice." Jenkins pressed the gun harder against Rosalie's head. "Unless her life means nothing to you." Zachary's expression didn't change, but Rosalie saw something flicker in his eyes, a silent message. He shifted his weight subtly, drawing Jenkins' attention. "It means everything to me," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the night air. "She means everything." In that moment, Rosalie understood. He was creating a distraction. Without giving herself time to think, she suddenly went limp, dropping her full weight downward. Surprised, Jenkins instinctively tried to catch her, the gun moving away from her head for just an instant. It was enough. A shot cracked from the ridge above Pete or Daniel. She couldn't tell which. Jenkins jerked backward, the bullet finding its mark. His gun discharged harmlessly into the air as he fell. Zachary was moving before Jenkins hit the ground, crossing the clearing in long strides. He knocked aside the weapon and kicked it away, then dropped to his knees beside Rosalie. "Rose," he breathed, gathering her into his arms. "Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" "I'm fine," she assured him, though she was trembling now that the danger had passed. "Just a split lip and some bruises." His hand gently cupped her face, examining the damage with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "I never should have let you come." "If I hadn't, you wouldn't have seen Blanchard flanking you," she pointed out. Pete and Daniel emerged from the darkness, herding the few remaining criminals before them. "Sheriff's on his way with deputies," Pete announced. "Got our signal shots." "Powell and Blanchard?" Zachary asked, helping Rosalie to her feet but keeping a supportive arm around her waist. "Trussed up like Thanksgiving turkeys back by the trail," Daniel confirmed. "Blanchard's wounded, but he'll live to hang." As Zachary checked Jenkins to confirm he was dead, Rosalie leaned against the wagon, the events of the night catching up with her. She watched as Zachary took charge of the scene, directing Pete and Daniel to secure the prisoners and the evidence. In the heat of danger, he was commanding and decisive, every inch the experienced detective. Within an hour, the sheriff arrived with several deputies. The clearing became a flurry of activity as bodies were removed, prisoners secured, and evidence cataloged. Zachary gave a detailed report, introducing Rosalie as his associate rather than his wife, which earned her curious looks from the lawmen. By the time everything was sorted out, dawn was breaking over the eastern mountains. The sheriff insisted on escorting everyone back to town, where the prisoners would be jailed and formal statements taken. "You should see the doctor about those injuries, madam," the sheriff told Rosalie as they prepared to leave. "I'll take care of her," Zachary said, his tone allowing no argument. The ride back to Hillsboro was conducted mostly in silence, everyone exhausted from the night's events. At the sheriff's office, Zachary submitted his official badge and credentials, confirming his identity as a Pinkerton detective. Rosalie gave her statement, explaining her role in the investigation. "Mighty unusual, having a woman involved in such business," the sheriff commented, though not unkindly. "Miss Harrington proved invaluable," Zachary replied. "I couldn't have closed this case without her assistance." His acknowledgment warmed her, despite her exhaustion. After completing the necessary paperwork, Zachary insisted on taking her to the doctor, who cleaned her split lip and confirmed she had no serious injuries. "You need rest," the doctor advised. "Both of you." Given the early hour, the hotel was the only practical option. Zachary requested 2 rooms, but the clerk informed them only one was available. "It has 2 beds," he added quickly, noting their expressions. Too tired to seek alternatives, they accepted the room. Once inside, the awkwardness of their situation became apparent. The pretense of marriage was no longer necessary, yet something undefined lingered between them. "You take the bed," Zachary said. "I'll use the chair." "Don't be ridiculous," Rosalie replied. "There are 2 beds and we're both exhausted." He hesitated, then nodded. "I'll step out while you prepare for sleep." She changed into a nightgown she'd hastily packed before leaving the ranch, grateful they'd had the foresight to bring overnight bags in case their surveillance extended longer than planned. When Zachary returned, he'd removed his gun belt, boots, and outer shirt, though he remained otherwise clothed out of propriety. They lay in their separate beds, a gulf of just a few feet between them that somehow felt enormous. Despite her exhaustion, Rosalie found herself unable to sleep, her mind replaying the events of the night and the kiss Zachary had given her before descending into danger. "Zachary," she whispered into the quiet room, "are you awake?" "Yes." His voice came immediately, suggesting he'd been as restless as she. "What happens now?" "With the case closed, I mean." She heard him shift in his bed. "Officially, I'll file my final report tomorrow. The prisoners will be transferred to Santa Fe for trial. The counterfeiting operation is dismantled, and unofficially," she pressed. A long silence followed. "Unofficially, I need to decide what I want my future to look like." "Will you return to Chicago?" "That depends," he said softly. "On what?" Another pause. "On whether I have a reason to stay." Rosalie's heart quickened. What kind of reason would be sufficient? She heard him sit up, and then the creak of his bed as he rose. In the dim light filtering through the curtains, she saw him move to sit on the edge of her bed. "Rose," he began, his voice husky with emotion. "When Jenkins had that gun to your head, I realized something. All these years I've been moving from case to case, place to place, never putting down roots because the job was everything. But in that moment, none of it mattered except you." She sat up, her breath catching in her throat. "Zachary, I know our marriage was a pretense," he continued, "a necessary deception for the case, but somewhere along the way it started to feel real to me. Coming home to you each evening, talking by the fire, building a life together even for just these few weeks, it showed me what I've been missing." "For me too," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I came west seeking adventure and a new beginning. I never expected to find someone like you." His hand found hers in the darkness. "I'm not offering a pretend marriage anymore, Rose. When I thought I might lose you tonight, I knew I love you, not as part of a cover story, but truly." Tears welled in Rosalie's eyes. "I love you too. I think I have since that first day when you claimed me as your wife to protect me from men you knew were dangerous." Zachary raised her hand to his lips. "Then marry me. For real this time. Stay with me at the ranch, make it our home. I'll resign from the Pinkertons, raise cattle instead of chasing criminals. You'd give up your career for me." "In a heartbeat," he said without hesitation. I've seen enough danger and darkness to last a lifetime. What I want now is a future with you, peaceful mornings and quiet evenings, building something that matters." Rosalie reached out, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "Then yes, Zachary Winters, I'll marry you properly, this time with a real ceremony and genuine vows." He gathered her into his arms, his kiss gentle against her injured lip but filled with promise. When they separated, he pressed his forehead to hers. "We should get some rest. Tomorrow will be a busy day." "Stay," she whispered, unwilling to let him go even the short distance to the other bed. "Just hold me while I sleep." He hesitated only briefly before stretching out beside her, wrapping her in his protective embrace. "I love you, Rose," he murmured against her hair. "And I love you," she replied, finally feeling as though she'd found exactly where she belonged. They were married 2 weeks later in Hillsboro's small church. Mrs. Abernathy cried throughout the ceremony, while Pete and Daniel stood proudly as witnesses. The sheriff gave the bride away, having developed a fatherly fondness for Rosalie after the events at the mine. News of Jenkins' death and the arrests of Powell, Blanchard, and the others had caused a sensation throughout the territory. The fact that Zachary was a Pinkerton detective who'd been working undercover had only added to the drama. But what really captivated the town's imagination was the love story, how a pretend marriage had blossomed into the real thing. After the ceremony, they returned to the ranch, their home now, truly and legally. Zachary had submitted his resignation to the Pinkerton agency, who had accepted it with reluctance but understanding. His final report had been filed, the case closed with commendations for his work. That evening, as they stood on the porch watching the sunset, Zachary wrapped his arms around his new wife from behind. "Happy, Mrs. Winters?" he asked, his lips close to her ear. "Completely," she replied, leaning back against him. "Though I still find it strange that 3 men wanting me as a cook led to all this." He chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest against her back. "I think fate had a hand in bringing you to Hillsboro that day." "Fate and your quick thinking," she teased. "I still remember the shock on their faces when you announced I wasn't hired. I was your wife." "Best impulsive decision I ever made," he said, turning her in his arms to face him. "Who would have thought a pretend marriage could lead to such genuine happiness?" Rosalie rose on tiptoes to kiss him, no longer hindered by a split lip or propriety. "I think, Mr. Winters, that this is one case where the reality has far surpassed the pretense." His answering kiss was all the confirmation she needed that he agreed completely. In the years that followed, the Winters ranch prospered. They added to their herd, built a larger house, and eventually welcomed children, 2 boys and a girl who grew up strong and free in the New Mexico sunshine. Zachary never returned to detective work, finding greater satisfaction in building a legacy with the woman he loved. Sometimes, visitors to Hillsboro would ask about the famous counterfeiting case and the detective who'd gone undercover to solve it. The older residents would smile knowingly and direct them to the prosperous ranch, 5 miles outside town, where they might find Zachary and Rosalie Winters, the couple whose love story began with a lie but grew into the truest thing either had ever known: the end.